Welcome to this episode of the Modern Day Missionaries podcast. You are going to love today's episode with Dr. Tim Elmore. We're going to be speaking on different generations, their strengths, how they're different, how they can work together so that you can make your team more effective. So Dr. Tim Elmore is founder and CEO of Growing Leaders, an Atlanta-based nonprofit organization created to develop emerging leaders. And his work grew out of 20 years of serving alongside John Maxwell. Tim has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, USA Today, Psychology Today, and he's been featured on CNN's Headline News, Fox Business, and many more to talk about leading multiple generations in the marketplace. He's written 38 books, including Habitudes, Images That Form Leadership, Habits and Attitudes, 8 Paradoxes of Great Leadership, and his latest book, A New Kind of Diversity, Making the Different Generations on Your Team a Competitive Advantage. I've read it, and it's fantastic. And recently, Tim was at a YWAM missions conference talking to people in the mission space. So we're really excited to hear from him today on how these ideas can help us work more effectively on the teams that we serve. So let's jump into today's interview. Tim, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. We are thrilled to have you.
Stephanie, I'm honored to be with you. This is going to be a fun conversation.
It is. And talking about generations and how they can work well together and learn from one another, especially in the context of teams and missions.
Yeah.
I know you spoke on this recently at a YWAM conference. I'd love to just begin by saying, for missionaries, why is this topic about generations and teams so important?
Yeah, you have an hour. Um, I would say the top one or two things that come to my mind in response to that question is um, when we serve in ministry, particularly cross-cultural ministry, it's easy to confuse what is cultural and what is timeless. So we all know as missionaries, we got to be, empathetic to the culture and understanding, read the culture before you lead the culture. But I think in the body of Christ, we can start baptizing things that ought to change, but we make it timeless. Churches do this wherever they are. Ministries can do this. So I think if we have been, let's say, serving for 25, 30, maybe even 40 years, we can start holding on to things that we ought not hold on to. And we think they're sacred. We think this is the right way. This is Jesus' way to do it. No, it's not. It's the way you learned it back in 1992. So I'm being silly here, but you know what I'm saying. We're not as open to ideas. This is interesting research. Dr. Raymond Cattell, way back 50 years ago in the mid 70s, did some research and released it. And I think we forgot about it because it's 50 years old. He says over time, our brains morph a bit and they move from fluid intelligence, which is very adaptable and innovative, to crystallized intelligence, which is more apt to clarify and summarize and teach. Well, that's good news. But I think once we morph at 40 and start moving more into crystallized intelligence, we hold on to what we've learned in the past rather than what we can learn in the future. And I think that happens far too often when a Gen Z missionary joins the team and they've got these wacko way out ideas. At least that's what we think. And we're not as open as we ought to be to the difference. So I'll stop.
Yeah. No, that's so good. And we do, I know within modern day, the missionaries that we have, and we have all different kinds of listeners from all different missions organizations and agencies, but we serve about 1,000 worldwide. And within our numbers, we have a ton of diversity in
Yeah.
ages and generations. And so it's really relevant in that I think people are joining teams where they're not the same generation
Yeah.
as somebody else. And you got to learn how to work together. I love what you said there too, Tim. You said, read them before you lead them. Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, this is exactly what Jesus did. When you look at him interfacing with people in the Gospels, he talks about water to the woman at the well. He talks about money to the rich young ruler. He's totally different in his approach, even though it's the same gospel. And we need to borrow a page from that playbook. But listen, that means we need to work harder because we're deciphering who's in front of me and how, what age group are they from, and all of that's important. In fact, I would say this: every missionary will understand this. Just as where a person is born informs who they become, when a person is born informs who they become. So I think Jesus did it. We watched him do it in the Gospels. We've got to do it now. So let me share an analogy that just came to my mind that I think will be perfect for anybody in cross-cultural ministry. This month, I'm going to fly over to the Philippines to do some work there, and I'm really looking forward to it. I've been there about 5 times, and I love it. When I hop off that plane, I am going to be psyched up to work harder to connect with people there because they're not from Atlanta, Georgia, where I live. They have different customs, they have different values. Some of them will speak a different language. Bingo. I think as a baby boomer, when I talk to a Gen Zer, different customs, different values, different language. And I need to be willing to work like I would work in a cross-cultural setting with this person right in front of me that maybe is from my nation, but not from my generation. So if we'll be willing to do the work, I'm telling you, we can make this work and obey what's written in the Psalms from generation to generation. Don't we read this from David? You bet we do. But
Yes.
then when it comes to us, we're not quite willing to do that work. And it's our bad, not their bad. We're the ones that need to connect with the young and raise them up and disciple, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes we're not willing to budge because we think what we're doing is sacred in its style.
That's an excellent analogy because you're absolutely right. We would never assume
Yeah,
that somebody from another country would just,
yeah,
well, I mean, if we have some degree of cultural
yeah, yeah,
openness and intelligence, we wouldn't assume that. But we do sometimes assume that people
yeah,
from different generations should just get it.
yeah,
And we have people listening to this who are on that maybe older side.
yeah,
And we have a lot of people listening to who might be in that Gen Z side who are figuring this out. So we've got people who are leading, we've got people who are joining. Everybody, I think, is leading it to some degree.
yeah, yeah,
But I would love for you to kind of go through what are the different generations that you
yeah.
outline in the book, and what would be some of those key differences between
Yeah.
them?
Good. Good. Okay. So very quickly, I'll make this quick, but hopefully clear. The oldest generation that might still be serving would be from the silent generation or the builder generation. They're far past retirement age, but as you know, sometimes we're living longer and working longer. We still love the Lord and we still got it in us. And so those are the people born between 1929 and 1945. Well past retirement age, they would value loyalty and consistency, frugality. They're very frugal, very conservative. Save the wrapping paper at Christmas time. We'll use it next year. You know, that sort of generation. Okay. They were called builders because they built so much out of so little. After them come the baby boomers. That's my generation. 1946 to 64. There was a boom of babies right after World War II. So hence the name. And boomers didn't grow up in a time of depression. They grew up in a time of expansion. So very different mindset as they came of age and started serving in their careers. Um, After the baby boomers come the baby busters or Gen X. So Gen X was the title that stuck, but baby buster was the first title they were given by social scientists. And the reason they were is because their generation launched with the introduction of the birth control pill. So fertility rates were governed by the
Mhm.
ability to, we're not going to have kids until we want kids. And then you have Roe v. Wade in 73, at least in America. So you
Yeah.
have a shrinking population, which affected enrollment, employment, and so baby busters grew up in a time not of expansion, but a recession and inflation. The 70s and late 60s were a hard time. So Xers grew up a little more jaded than the optimistic, hopeful boomers, who were burning flags and buildings and bras and everything else back in the early 60s. This is very anecdotal, you can tell, but okay, so after the Gen Xers come the Gen Yers or millennials. These are basically the 80s and 90s folks. There'll be a lot of millennials. Millennials are now the largest generation in the workforce. I don't know
Mm.
if it's the mission force, but certainly the workforce. So they would be young professionals up to midlife. And millennials grew up in a time of digital customization. So their mantra is life is a cafeteria. I'm choosing my playlist of songs that I listen to. I don't have to buy an album. I'm choosing 3 different colleges to attend to get 1 degree. I'm
Mm.
It's a cafeteria. I'm mixing up my broccoli and my roast beef and my jello. So, and by the way, this often happens, at least out in the world, with faith. A millennial would have a little Jesus, a little Buddha, a little Oprah, a little Kelly Clarkson, and it's like, what are you doing? There's no one true source, but that doesn't matter. I'm mixing and matching. It's like a free agent mindset. And I bet some of the older missionaries would go, yeah, I got some free agents on my team right now that I don't expect them to stay around very long, because of that.
Mm.
Finally, Gen Z would be the new kids on the block. They're entering their careers, and they'll be the ones entering for the next decade or so. In all of my research, both qualitative and quantitative, focus groups as well as just raw data, I just fell in love with them because I began to understand them.
Mm.
I started as a college pastor in 1979. This is my 45th year of my career. And, it was the late boomers coming through. Then it was the Xers. Then it was, now it's Gen Z. I love Gen Z as much as any generation, but I had to really pivot, Stephanie, to understand them. So they have grown up in a time, they're true digital natives for sure. They've never known a day without the internet and without a smartphone. But their mantra as 21st century people, not 20th century people, would be, I'm coping and I'm hoping.
Mm.
So there's a hopeful side to them because they're young and they want to change the world. But right now, they may just be coping with their mental health issues. Depression and anxiety have been normalized. Not everybody, but a large enough number that this is a normal thing to have a therapist or two in their life.
Yep.
And I think oftentimes somebody over 45 goes, what the heck? What are you talking about? We are the therapist for the world. Yeah, and I need one too. So we're going to have to pivot if we're going to stay relevant. Older folks, listen to me, please. I'm one of you. I am an old guy, but I am pivoting and pivoting and pivoting. And I'll tell you, Stephanie, you didn't ask this, but can I tell you, my greatest lesson right now is to listen.
Mm.
I'll tell you a quick story that's very, very, very current. My kids are both in their 30s, and I adore them both. And I think they adore me. I'm going to guess. But my older daughter, my firstborn, Bethany, is 36. And we've always had a really fun, loving relationship as a father and a daughter. But I began to capture clues that she didn't feel like I was hearing her or understanding her or really listening to her because I had a talk, I had a lecture, I had a sermon, I had a book. And my wife has really been helpful, but she said, Tim, she just needs you to hear her. So we began to see a counselor virtually. She's in Orlando, I'm in Atlanta. And I tried to listen, but I had something to add. You know how that goes. Please hear me out here. And after the last session was over, I called her up and I said, Bethany, I just had an epiphany. It was like I was visited by the ghost of Christmas future. You remember Ebenezer Scrooge
Yeah.
you know, and I said, I don't want our lives to come to a close where I finally pass away, and we never did get this right.
Wow.
And you don't even want to talk at the funeral because we didn't get it right. So I've been calling her every month, and my job on that call is just to listen. And she's not short of words. So I'm listening we had an hour-long call. It went 90 minutes until I had to go. But I was so glad that at the end of the call, she felt heard. And so I guess I'm thinking Xers and boomers, if you can just listen a little bit more. If you're not, maybe you are, maybe you're doing stellar, but they want to feel heard. I'll tell you what, I'm learning now the way I view respect and the way Gen Z views respect, totally different. I think they believe that I view respect as compliance. Just do what I tell you to do. They view respect as equity. There's
Mm.
equity here between you and I. There isn't a power gap. Well, I would say, of course, there's a power gap. I've been doing this for 45 years. You've been doing this for 45 minutes. But I'm telling you, if we can begin to see, uh, we need to bring more equity, and we need to be listening as well as teaching, and we need to be open-minded as well as stubborn. Stubborn on some issues, but very open-minded on others. So I'm sorry, that was a long answer to a short
Oh,
question, but I feel like that's the move we've got to make as seasoned veterans.
it was fantastic. And thank you for sharing such a vulnerable example because I think you're reminding us that the implications, yes, are teams, but also the
Yeah,
family relationships as
yeah,
well. Because clearly, the
Yeah,
people that we're parenting, or for younger people listening, their parents are not of the same generation. So
yeah,
this has implications for all of our relationships
yeah,
in life. I mean, even, we talk a lot about finances even here, even like for somebody who is maybe appealing to a supporter who's of a different generation.
yeah,
How can they communicate differently? So
yeah.
this has far reaching implications. Tim, what are some of the biggest clashes that you're seeing right now of just generations not understanding each other, and trying to think about this in a missions context?
Okay,
If
yeah.
you've even seen it there, what's
I have.
happening?
Yeah, in fact, I was with last year some Assemblies of God missionary leaders that were over regions and countries, and I mean, we're all kind of same age. We're all over, 50 or older, and I was trying to build a bridge instead of a wall for on behalf of Gen Z and millennials. But I tell you what kept coming up. It was the need for the seasoned veteran leader to confront or to offer feedback to what they would consider a fragile generation. Okay, can I just say that here? I'm not saying Gen Zers listening that you're all fragile, but the perception from an older person might be, man, you guys are snowflakes. Come on, get with it, get with the program. Come on, you need to build a little grit. We want to see grit. This is what the older people are saying, and you're probably overhearing it. Here's what I would say to a veteran: if I need to correct them or offer them feedback, instead of telling them what I need to tell them, I think I am going to do much better if I earn my right to do it, not with a badge that I'm wearing, but with a relationship I'm building.
That's
So I
good.
have a little acronym, Stephanie, that I'm using. You know how for years and years and years we've used that little phrase, this is a leg you got to stand on?
Yeah.
So I'm taking the letters ALEG, and it's helping me as an old guy, okay? So the letter A reminds me the first step is to ask, not tell. I need to ask, tell me what your thinking was when you made that decision. And it's not cliche that I'm asking this. I really want to know because I don't know why I don't know why they were doing that ridiculous thing they were doing. But listen, when I ask them, so I'll tell them, they feel valued. Don't you feel valued when somebody asks you a question? Oh, you want to know my thoughts? So if I ask instead of tell, they're feeling valued. The letter L is listen. It does very little good to ask a question if I'm not willing to do the due diligence to listen. And when I listen well to what they're saying, they feel heard. And Stephanie, the number one thing our surveys show that Gen Z wants in a workplace is to feel heard.
Hmm.
We have a problem with giving them a voice on day one, but they go, why wouldn't I have a voice on day one? We would say, because you don't have an experience. They would say, maybe that's an advantage. You have 20th century experience. I have intuition on the future. That's a great point they're making. So listening is important. Now they feel heard. E is empathize. This is where I've had to work. If I'm listening, I need to find ways to communicate verbally, non-verbally, and paraverbally, meaning my tone. Oh, I'm understanding you. When I empathize, they feel understood. So I learned to say things like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea that happened," or "Oh goodness, I can only imagine what you were feeling when that happened." Now that may sound very cliche to somebody that's old, but I'm telling you, when I do that, my 20 somethings on my team love it. In fact, I'm winning them. I'm getting choked up again. I'm winning them not because I'm the founder of our organization, but because I'm listening to somebody that's 40 years younger than I am. But
Wow.
here's the letter G in leg. So I ask, I listen, I empathize. Now I can do the very thing I wanted to do, which is to guide them. But I'm guiding them having won the right through pocket change, not through position or, you know, I don't know, badges and so forth that I've earned over the years. So I would say, listeners, if you have a hard time offering feedback or even receiving feedback for that matter, we need to connect at a relationship level. And if we can do that, anything can be solved, I think, in our ministries. Yeah.
And what I love about what you're saying there too, Tim, is it doesn't feel like you're trying to listen or to empathize to get something from them, to
Yeah.
force them to do something. I mean,
Yeah.
I hear in your heart, even as you're expressing through even,
Yeah.
your emotions, that you truly care about them. And I think when you
Yeah.
care about something too, you also recognize they have something to give.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how can we not just love people so that they'll let
Yeah,
us lead them.
yeah.
How can we love people and actually have that, what you're talking about, that mentality of like, what have I got to receive from you? There's something there.
I love your animation, Stephanie. Um, Here's the first that came to my mind. I'm doing a brand new book on this called The Future Begins with Z. And it's on how Gen Z is going to upset the workplace, ready or not. They will. They're going to upset missions. They're going to upset ministry. They're going to upset business, sports. They want a game within a game with sports. It's not enough just to watch a game and you're going, what? Just watch the football game. So here's what I would propose. I believe the age of authority is actually going down, meaning without a title or position, they're going to have authority earned by, I understand social media. I understand how to monetize social media. 1 out of every 8 Gen Zers is making money off of TikTok or Instagram or something. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh.
So the age of authority is going down. So one reason we have a good reason to listen to them is they're going to have some insights that we don't have, intuition we don't have. But here's the corresponding reality. While the age of authority is going down, the age of maturity is going up, meaning they may fully mature not at 18 or 19 or 20, but at 26, 27, 28. And we get so angry sometimes as older leaders that they're not ready. Stephanie, I have lost count of the number of university deans that have said to me, 26 is the new 18. Meaning what we once expected
Wow.
at 18. You're a man now, let's take responsibility. Let's take initiative. Or you're a woman now, let's go. They're not seeing it until later. And that just, we don't understand it. It's just, we just don't understand it. But I'm telling you, I don't think it's their fault. If they're not ready, what were mom and dad doing? What was the college professor doing? Come on. We're ready when adults and mentors in our life get us ready. So maybe we need to stop the blame game and say, let me now coach you up. So leaders listening, here's what I would say to you. You're going to need to listen a little bit more than you used to, and you're going to need to coach a little bit more than you used to.
That's so good. And you call that, I think, reverse mentoring in the
Yeah,
book, that
yeah, I do.
learning from them at that same time, which
Yeah,
I really like because as you pointed out, they need mentors,
yeah.
but also they just understand things that we couldn't
It's so
even
true.
imagine because of the world that they've been raised in.
Yeah, it's so true. If you don't know the term reverse mentoring that Stephanie just brought up, it's the final chapter in a new kind of diversity, which is on the subject. But it means you sit down with someone from a very different generation from you, older or younger. You swap stories because you always find common ground when you swap stories, always. And then you take turns mentoring each other. So the older is clearly going to impart some sage wisdom that you picked up, not only from scripture, but from experience. But then you flip flop, you change hats. And now the older is learning from the younger on maybe, I don't know how to use that app to market what we're doing or to up our donor list or whatever. So I do this in our office with team members that are 30 and 40 years younger than me. And I love what I learn every time. And I found one more thing. When I listen and learn, they naturally want to listen and learn to me. I mean, once again, I don't have to say, do you realize I've written a whole bunch of books here? I don't need to say that. I can just be old Tim that puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like you do. So anyway, I really love that assignment. And I hope that listeners will take us up on that.
Yes. And I think I heard you speaking in a podcast episode with Craig Rochelle, and you mentioned,
Yeah.
you said modern elders and young geniuses. And I thought,
Yeah.
what a great way to kind of sum that
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. It's such a good way to profile. Chip Conley first coined that term years ago, but it's a way of, in a very, very hopeful way, optimistic way. Modern elders are those people that are gonna, be in the crystallized intelligence phase,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to respect them because they have something to add. But I'm surrounded by young geniuses. In fact, they're all younger than me now on my team. But I'm so grateful that they're there and that they have these crazy
Yeah.
ideas. It's always crazy until it happens. So we need to turn them loose and let them try it out and see what might happen. So, yeah,
Yeah. So I think, you talk about this a little bit in the book as well, but about preferences and
yeah,
expectations,
yeah,
how each generation's coming into a team, a workplace, a relationship with certain preferences and
yeah.
certain expectations. How can we manage those? Because there is this piece of us that's like, I'm sorry, I don't care if you expect that. That's
Yeah,
not happening here.
yeah,
And we
yeah,
all feel that a little bit. And you have
yeah,
preferences. I mean, some of the preferences of the younger generation, it feels like how can you be expecting that at such a young
yes,
age to have that kind of access?
yeah,
And yet, as you talked about, maybe there are ways that we can shift and change and make space for some of those as well. And I'd love for you to talk about it from both angles, because
okay,
again, we've got listeners who are in
yeah,
that, leading from older generations, but then we've got young people who are going, well, how can I manage the Gen X and the boomer
yeah,
expectations?
yeah. No, that's a great question. So I think it begins with the interview process. As you well know, that's very critical, particularly in cross-cultural work. So the three words I always talk to leaders about when it comes to this is two of them you've already got. So preferences, expectations, and then demands. There is
Mm,
some multiple generation folks in the interview that would have demands. And you want to know, is that really a demand or is that just the way you're talking right now? Because if it's a demand, we need to stop the interview right now and I need to pray for you and say, go find another job. It's not going to happen here. That's going to be key that we need to have the courage enough to say, if that's truly a demand, Jessica or Josh or whoever, then you deserve another place to work because it's not going to work here. But let me go through all three very, very rapidly. The first one is preferences. This is the softest of the three. Some people might come in and say, I want this and I want that. And if you can find out it's a preference, well, that would be something that they would like, but it's not necessary. And it's good to call it what it is in the interview. Just say, I don't know if that's going to happen. It might, but just know it might not. And just know now, if it doesn't, I still need you to be a team player. Expectations are a little stronger. Um, I think I've said on other podcasts this line: conflict expands based on the distance between expectations and reality.
ooh, that's
Um,
good.
yeah, I'm gonna say it again. Conflict expands based on the distance between expectations, what I expected, and what actually happens, reality. So one easy illustration is if I tell my wife I'm going to be home at 7 for dinner and I get home at 7:10, it's not a big deal. If I get home at 9:30, we're going to have a conversation about that. And it's not because she cannot live without her husband for 2.5 hours. It's because I created an expectation. And life is about managing expectations. So find this out the earlier, the better. In fact, ongoing, have these conversations because sometimes they come out in anger or resentment, and you go, there's something brewing inside of you that we need to talk about. So that's huge. And then, of course, demands, I've already covered that, but demands are this hardcore, I want to be the VP by 25 years old or whatever. And you might want to go, well, it's probably not going to happen. And we ought to have that conversation now when the stakes are still low. So I do think it does work both sides. A Gen Zer might see an expectation on the part of older boss or supervisor or even colleague. And I would just say we need to grow the courage to have the conversation about it. Don't withdraw in the name of grace or forgiveness or whatever. I don't know. We hide behind biblical
Yeah.
terms and it's ridiculous. Have the conversation and sit down and by the way, I would say own it when you sit down and say, listen, I'm struggling right now. It's not you, it's me. I'm struggling right now with something that happened or something you said. I just need to understand. That's a very safe way to enter because you might find there's a great reason for what they said and you go, oh, it really was my problem, wasn't it? But then if it's not and it's a mutual problem, well, now you've got it out on the table and it's much easier to do it once it's out on the table. It's kind of like evangelism. The hardest thing about evangelism is the opening conversation. Once you get
Right.
going, it's okay. The same thing with conflict management and confrontations.
Absolutely. So it sounds like they can really do some homework in investigating what are some
Yes.
generalities
Yes.
about generations kind of going into it, but then not creating stereotypes and saying,
Yes.
okay, I know some things. I
Yeah.
read a new kind of diversity. I
Yeah.
know a little
Yeah.
bit about generations, but now I want to hear from you as to what those
Yeah.
expectations and preferences are and outing it.
I would exactly do it that way, Stefan. That's brilliant. Um, in fact, in the book, I even say my goal is not to stereotype, but to understand. So there's
Yeah.
some macro things to understand about baby boomers, right, and Xers, but there are also some about millennials and Gen Z. So I really believe if you can go in saying I've understood this in the past, would that be true about you, or not so much, and let them go, yeah, absolutely, or no, I don't want to be stereotyped. That's not true. But at
Yeah.
least you're asking the question. Once again, it's an ask, not a tell. Yeah.
Well, and I wish I would have done this thinking back to, some of our time on the field. I remember I was born in that interesting year that's like right between Gen X and millennials. It was
Yeah.
1980. So I
Yeah.
I feel like I've got a foot kind of in both worlds.
Yes.
My
Yeah.
husband's Gen X.
Yeah.
And we had an internship program down there at the church we served at for a number of years. And so we'd had a lot of young millennials come in.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking if I would have known some of this stuff, because they were hilarious and fun, and they
Yeah.
brought so much life and new
Yeah.
ideas. So we
Yeah.
loved it. And then there was other times where we were like, what
What?
on earth?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions, a lot of needing to process
Yeah.
things through that I don't think, we had that expectation. And then the pastor we served was in the boomer generation. So
Yeah.
yeah, so interesting looking at how that all played out. And it would
Yeah.
have been helpful to kind of know, like, oh, they're expecting something different from us.
Yeah.
And we're expecting something different from them. So you do the best you can, but when you've got language to
Yeah.
put to
Yes.
it,
Yeah.
just makes it so much more clear. It goes back to that whole clarity is kindness. Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
It's so
Like you
true.
said, it's not graceful to just hold it all in.
Yeah.
It's graceful to have the conversation.
No doubt. Yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, something just came to my mind as you were talking. One of the differences in expectation between an older generation and a younger is career path. It is very common, not all the time, but common for a young 20 something to ask the interviewer or the employer, what do you see as my career path here? Well, Stephanie, I would have never had the guts to ask that question of John Maxwell back in 1982 or whatever. That was up to me. I got to come up with that, and hopefully I can earn my right to, move forward. But they're asking because, and here's why they're asking. They're wanting to know, do you see me as a worthy investment? Am I
Mm.
currency or a commodity? I think Gen Z often feels like we treat them like commodities and just raw material that you use and abuse and then turn loose. You'll leave in 2.5 years anyway. But if we treat them as currency, well, we value currency, don't we? Let's think about it. $100 bill isn't valuable because of the paper it's printed on. It's paper. It's because there's 100 on that thing. This is valuable. If we could begin to see Gen Z as currency to invest in and to, oh my gosh, you're going to be so useful and you're going to get big. You're going to grow just like a good investment grows over time if I treat you well. Well, now we do come up with a career path possibility. We don't demand it, but we offer it. I'm telling you, we're going to keep them longer if we believe in them. We expect a lot of them, and we invest in those young job candidates.
Mm. That's so good. So, Tim, a question came to mind as you were talking there
Okay.
in terms of the global implications of this. So,
Yeah.
yes, the predominant part of our audience, I would say, would be English speakers, a lot of Americans, but we actually have people from all over the world.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you've done research into this, but if we're thinking about mission teams where they might have people from not only from different generations, but also from different cultures, different
Yeah.
countries as a part of their team, how applicable is this when you start mixing in generations from other cultures?
Yeah. There is a difference for sure. So I think everybody listening would know that most Asian cultures would value the respect and the honor thing. Often honor and shame both are bigger players in the game than perhaps the Western Hemisphere, where Americas go whatever, whatever. So that would be a difference, and I think it's important on the continent of Africa to know how they would view that, Asia, Latin America, etc. However, I'm more and more convinced as time marches on, the world is becoming flat. Not literally, but as Thomas Friedman said, flat in a sense that the internet and the television are the great equalizers. So here's a good example of this. I was in Singapore some years ago, and I had a teenager say to me, Dr. Tim, I have more in common with teenagers in America than I do my own parents here in Singapore.
Wow.
And what they meant was I realized there's a cultural similarity in my family, but more and more I'm on the same websites. I'm getting the same products, the same Apple products, to be clear. And it's more and more, wow, we're seeing similarities. So leaders listening, just know the younger the person, the more you're going to see similarities all the way around the world, based on generation, not location. It's quite wild to me.
Well, and new missionaries are going to naturally, for the most
And
part, come from those younger generations.
yeah,
You don't,
that's right.
you still have some, sure, maybe
Mhm.
builders or boomers launching out. I remember we had a gentleman who was, he and his wife were in their 70s when they became missionaries for the first time, but that was unusual. That wouldn't
Yeah,
be
yeah,
the most
that's right.
common. And
Yeah.
so you're saying the gap gets more and more narrow as the generations progress. So with Gen Alpha, you're going to find a lot more in common with Gen Alpha around the world
Yes,
than builders who might not even have the same name if you were looking at them from a
that's
different
right.
country based on
No,
their
that's a
background.
great, great, great point. And to your, point, you just mentioned you're kind of in between Gen X and millennials.
Yeah.
I'm that way with Gen X and boomers, so I'm
Are
just one generation.
you?
So we're called tweeners. Tweeners are people 5 years at the end of one generation or 5 years at the beginning of another. We're gonna have characteristics probably from both that,
Yeah.
and I bet you see that in your life, and I see it in my life.
I
So,
kinda love it. I feel like I can very much understand both
yeah,
sides. It's really nice.
you can become all things to all men, to be 1 Corinthians 9 biblical.
Yes. I mean, empathy
Yeah,
all over the place.
that's right.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so for people listening who wanna start weaving this into their teams,
Yeah.
do you have any suggestions for, some team activities that they could do to help close that generation gap, start conversations, bring the teams closer?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few simple ones in the book. Let me just name a couple. Well, one, we talk about reverse mentoring. I definitely would love to see you challenge your team, whether you're at the top of the flow chart or not, or organizational chart. Challenge your team to mix generations one on one, and build friendships that wouldn't ordinarily happen. Number two, we have a little exercise called ditch the niche. So, ditch the niche is where you purposely form task forces or teams or agile teams, that have a sunset 6 months later, but you get people from different generations on it and you ask or inquire, how do you view this? So, one simple one is when we were getting ready to release this book, A New Kind of Diversity, I asked Gen Zers, Millennials, Gen Xers, Boomers, how would you market this to your demographic? Well, I got different answers from all of them. So it was very helpful. And then we got in a room and we said, ooh, that would cross over here. And I didn't even think about that. And so Ditch the Niche purposefully puts different people together based on generation and really gives them permission and empowerment to share from their angle. Don't try to be like me. In fact, please don't be different. So that's another one that I have really really enjoyed over time. One thing we often do, it's just anecdotal, but we do a lunch and learn, meaning every week we meet together to have lunch, but we're going to learn something, and it could be personal or professional growth. Well, we will sometimes do a little activity called share your superpowers. So it's true that everybody has different gifts and talents, spiritual gifts, whatever. But the superpowers I have found more and more often come from the generation they're from. I mean, Cam is
Interesting.
gonna have superpowers on our team with TikTok that I do not have, okay? So that's a fun exercise, even though it's not specifically, if you're 25, do this, but sharing superpowers very, very often is informed by our generation.
And it's making me even think too, it would be fun to have people call out superpowers in other people as well.
Yeah.
Like, I think I'd love to know what I would love to know what people from other generations are seeing in me that I
Yes.
might not recognize or
Yeah.
that they value. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I
yeah.
agree, I agree, and I can tell you just after 30 minutes talking to you, I love your warmth. I just see grace all over you, I really do, and it's just been a few
Thank
minutes,
you.
which is so Jesus-like, and you're so, um, approachable. Now, granted, you're interviewing me, but I mean, I just love how you set this up to be very, very easy. That's a superpower. I wish everybody had that superpower, but they don't. So, anyway, I see that on you, Stephanie.
Well, thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. And as I was saying to you before we started the interview, I said you are like the triple threat where like you speak well, you write well, and you have something really good to say. I mean, I think having all those three together is pretty important. And
No.
what I loved even in our conversation today is that you showed your heart. I think there's a lot of people who speak on leadership or in business, and they have heart, but it doesn't always come across. So thank you for being in this space
Yeah.
and being willing to talk about personal things and about how much this means to you deeply. I think I think it's important. I think
Yeah,
it's really important.
yeah.
So you got lots of superpowers too. Man, what a fun way to end this conversation. I like this.
Good. It's been a joy to be with you, and I'm hoping that, listeners, you're at least thinking something good, even if we didn't say anything good, that you can do better with your team.
Tim, I can promise you, you said plenty of good things, many good things. People who are taking notes will have plenty to reflect on after this. And in fact, I'd love for you to share how people can continue to learn more. I know we mentioned the book, A New Kind of Diversity, which is excellent. There's a generational quiz I know that
Yeah,
they
that's right.
can take.
Yeah,
Can you
that
share a little bit more about that?
sure, yeah, there is a generational quiz that's free. It's 41 questions, and you'll get a report back saying, "Ah, you're pretty good with Xers, not so good with Gen Z," or something like that. And then it gives some steps that you could take, so that's fun. That is, inside the cover of the book. It's a QR code, but even if you went to Maxwell Leadership, this was a Maxwell Leadership, published book, you can find that quiz there. But the best way to find me, I do a monthly or actually twice a month article on this topic that I send out for free. So timelmore.com is how you can find me there. And then, of course, growingleaders.com is the organization I started. It's all about the next generation and habitudes and things like that. So we'd be
Yes.
happy to
And you
serve.
host a podcast as well, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a monthly, actually twice a month. I don't know why I keep saying monthly, but it's a lot of fun. And we have these kinds of conversations, Stephanie. It's so fun to just dig in with a colleague or with a guest and find out what they're learning about leading different generations.
Well, Tim, I know you gave our listeners plenty to think about, to pray about, to dig into today. So thank you again so much for joining us. We
It was
appreciate it.
my joy. Thanks for having me.